So yeah, we just got done watching the first Republican debate. Got Fox News on over here. Looks like it's on a commercial break right now. I wanted to give my review so everybody could get my opinions on things. And please give me your feedback. Leave a comment, subscribe, and like. So yeah, they had the first Republican debate tonight. It was called the Fox News Democracy 24 debate. There was a total of 8 candidates that participated. You had Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Mike Pence, Christie, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, and Doug Bergman. Asa Hutchinson was there, but I don't think anyone really noticed. Larry Elder notably didn't make it into the debate. He's claiming that he's going to sue the RNC, which is we'll see how that goes. But really, Larry, doesn't have much of a chance, as do most of these candidates. Don't have much of a chance, but Larry deserves a spot in these debates over candidates like Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum. Trump, of course, wasn't there, we'll touch on that briefly later in the video. The crowd was probably the ninth candidate, and we'll get into that as well. The debate was really divided up into 4 parts. There was what I consider the introduction, which focused on inflation and abortion. Then there was a part 2, which focused on President Trump and heavily centered around former Vice President Mike Pence. And then the final two parts are part 3. There was a focus on Ukraine, fentanyl, and securing the southern border. And then the last part was they had a lightning round, which was just kind of rapid-fire questions. They had a brief discussion on education, and then they had, of course, closing statements. So yeah, let's get into the first round, and I'm just going to give my review, just jump through everything that I found interesting about the debate, and then I'll also leave our rankings and rate each of the candidates. So DeSantis had a great first opening to the debate. Although later as the debate went on, Fox News is saying that he did a better job, but I felt that he really avoided answering questions, which is a shame because he came out in his first few answers showing a lot of energy, showing a willingness to punch back. No candidate really went after him too much, which was notable. I thought there would be a little bit more, especially with the leaking of his super PACs. His super PACs had about, I think it was 40 pages or so of policy points and talking points that he was supposed to lean on. He didn't really do that. So DeSantis opened up, had a great opening. We quickly went into some back and forth, and Vivek Ramaswamy, the entrepreneur businessman, was at the center of most of the back and forth. He got into it with Pence several times, but relatively early. It was a talking points argument. And Pence kept on going after him over his lack of experience, and that was a noticeable back and forth that kept happening. And then Christie later in this first little opening went after Vivek, comparing him to Obama, saying that he sounded like ChatGPT, and Ramaswamy laughed it off. I laughed at it. I thought that was a funny little jab. And Ramaswamy, to his credit, went back and said, give me a big bear hug like he did for Obama, which that's a noticeable historical event. Nikki Haley, of course, got in. She didn't use it always. I think her talking point is always kicks harder when you have heels. She didn't use that talking point, but she, of course, had to mention Margaret Thatcher. And that was kind of expected. There was a little bit. There was a discussion on inflation. That's where it started. And then there was a transition to the issue of abortion. And in that issue, Nikki Haley spoke up a little bit more, and they kind of focused the questions around her, as she was obviously the only female, and is the only female presidential candidate, really on both sides, unless I guess you could consider Marianne Williamson on the Democrat side. There was a little bit of Burgum and Hutchinson in the first part, but it just felt like a sideshow. They kind of ruined the flow of the debate, and the moderators felt like they had to include them in on the debate, and that was a real shame. Tim Scott, he was there. He never really got any momentum. It felt like, for the most part, in the early part of the debate, they went to him here and there. They actually went to Vice President Mike Pence almost last, and you could tell that he was getting noticeably frustrated in the early on stages of the debate. Part 2. it's funny, the moderators tried to set the scene with imagery of the Fulton County Jail and talking about Donald Trump, former President Trump. And then there was this part where Vivek and Christie once again went back and forth. Discussion on rule of law, law of order argument on Christie's behalf. And then at a later time, Vivek kind of mentioned this again, and he stated that he was the only candidate that was going to actually pardon Trump. Pence mentioned that he thought this was an admission of guilt, and that he doesn't presume anyone guilty. And that was the pardon question that Pence and Vivek went back and forth on. There was a section where the moderators asked if former Vice President Mike Pence did the right thing with how he handled the electors in regards to the 2020 election. Almost everybody said yes. DeSantis was kind of, once again, he didn't really answer the question. He kind of gave like a half wave. Vivek, that was when he jumped in with the pardon question. But Pence, Pence constantly at this point of the debate was interrupting the moderators. There was a section where Christie was trying to talk, and he couldn't even talk for a solid minute because the crowd wouldn't stop interrupting him, which was just kind of embarrassing. Just let the man talk. You can have a difference of opinion, but it was just a ridiculous way to go about it. That second section where it's all about Trump and really Pence is something to watch. I highly suggest you give it a watch just to see how all the candidates interact with one another. And once again, you'll see a reoccurring theme where Vivek is in the center of almost every argument in this debate, and even Nikki Haley mentions it, and I'll get into that in a second. So part 3 was about Ukraine, fentanyl, and securing the southern border. DeSantis wouldn't answer a question that they asked everybody, which was essentially, it was a Ukraine question: would you continue Ukraine funding? In fact, I think Vivek was the only candidate that stated he would not continue it, at least in the same way that it's being funded currently. DeSantis once again kind of gave a half a hand, and then he said, well, Europe needs to pay more. But then he just kind of talked himself into it, and there's another point later in the debate where he talked himself almost into a corner. Once again, we had Vivek and Mike Pence go at it, this time with Vivek stating that this isn't the USSR anymore, and then Pence, of course, kind of kept going after Vivek. Vivek then had a little scuttle with Nikki Haley, and he stated that Nikki Haley would get a job with Lockheed or Raytheon, which I thought was really just kind of, he went really directly at her. She, to her credit, didn't step down. She fought back and stated that he was going to essentially defund Israel, and he stated that that was not the case. DeSantis did jump in at this point, and he talked about, kind of deflected and turned the topic of Ukrainian funding, which it kind of led to the fentanyl discussion on the southern border by stating how he will send troops to the southern border. And because it became a discussion of like, why isn't the funding here? Why aren't we worried about our own country? And Haley was saying in the corner, they weren't really paying attention to her when DeSantis was talking. She was stating that we need to have we can do both. We can support our allies such as Ukraine, and we can secure our border. And DeSantis said, we're not doing either. And he said that he was going to send troops to the southern border to solve the southern border crisis. Later, he then doubled down and stated that he would send troops into Mexico to go after the cartel. Once again, Pence was trying to get his say in here and interrupting rather constantly. And then we got into the final part of the debate, which was really the worst part by far. At that point, it was, things were starting to slow down. The candidates weren't having as much back and forth. It was more of talking points. It felt more of a town hall talking points discussion. There was the mental and physical test to serve. Pence joked about that and said that everyone that serves in D.C. should be required to take that test, but then he quickly pivoted and stated that he trusts the voters to choose the candidates, which he then turned around and used that as a shot at Vivek, talking about experience. And that was Pence's main talking point, talking about experience. Ramaswamy then was mentioned because he was the youngest on stage, and the moderators gave him a chance to respond, and he talked about how he was taking a Republican message, a America First really message, or he kept calling it America Revolution. And then he said the revolution of 2024, which it's interesting to see a candidate say revolution after Bernie Sanders used to always talk, we need a revolution, right? And then you have Vivek doing the same thing. There was a little bit of discussion. I guess Vivek didn't vote in the presidential races until the last two elections, but they didn't really get into it. There was a little back and forth. There was almost too many people talking at this point. There was Asa Hutchinson made a terrible reference to how he was he pretty much crafted computer science education in his state. I work in IT, my background's in information technology, and I have my own business in IT. So I find this hilarious because Asa Hutchinson kind of stared blindly into the camera and gave talking points and was the most bland, talking points, robotic politician up there. Doug Burgum was also up there, and like I said, they felt like they had to go to those two, and it just ruined the flow, and they're really terrible candidates, to put it bluntly. Closing statements were pretty much run-of-the-mill. You had Vivek once again mentioning that American Revolution and Revolution of 2024, that stood out. The thing that ended the debate, which might be on TV tomorrow or tonight, and might be a little bit of a trend on social media, is how DeSantis nearly didn't realize he was on stage. He was up there, and they had to say, Governor, and he kind of woke up, and then he got into a very choreographed speech. It was almost too rehearsed, and that was unfortunate. One thing that, when I look at this debate, there was all these leaked memos from a DeSantis super PAC. There was, of course, Trump not being there. I don't know if that really played as big of a role as you would think. It definitely played a role, but I don't know if it played as big of a role as people thought. I mean, Trump was probably the winner tonight from not being up there, because it showed that, if he was up there, I think after watching the debate, you'd feel as if he would just destroy anyone up there, including DeSantis, who did a decent job, and Vivek, who was the anti-politician up there. He kind of took Trump's throne in that regard. So overall, I thought it was the first two parts of the debate were good. It wasn't great. If you look back on the debates of 2016, it probably isn't as interesting as the debates, just because you don't have Trump there, of course. But it also paints a picture of what politics will potentially be like after Donald Trump is no longer a part of the process. And it won't be a return to normalcy. We are going to have the outsider versus political insider. And tonight was truly, with Vivek kind of, front and center, and everybody else, with the exception of maybe DeSantis and Tim Scott, not really pointing their aim at him. It really kind of showed where politics could go going forward, which is, a lot of back and forth, a lot of division within, either of the parties, and, it kind of might be a lens into the future, maybe the distant future. We don't know, maybe 4 years, maybe 8 years. We'll see. We don't know how the political parties are going to change going forward. So overall, though, a good debate. It was entertaining for the first two parts. After the third, it was 2 hours long. Going into the second hour, it was kind of hard to watch, admittedly. So yeah, I want to give some grades and rankings for this first debate, the first Republican debate for 2024. It was in Milwaukee, by the way. I think if you had to pick a winner, it's Vivek Ramaswamy. First time on the center stage. Even if he took some heat from candidates, just the fact that he held his composure, he fought back, he didn't stand down, he didn't have any jitters, he didn't have any gaffes, that makes him the winner. I would give Vivek Ramaswamy a B for his first debate, which is a pretty good pretty good performance. I don't know how it would be different if Trump was up there, but Vivek held his own and showed a contrast to the other 7 candidates, which is something you really want to do. Then you have Ron DeSantis. I would give Ron DeSantis the second place, maybe a tie with Tim Scott for second place. Ron DeSantis started out with a lot of energy. He was very inspirational in his first 2 answers, talking about COVID and how he was a leader, like unlike any other leader when our country was going through that whole debacle of the pandemic. But however, he didn't answer questions later on, and he had a few times where he painted himself into corners when he was answering questions. He didn't go after any candidate, which was in the memos that were leaked, except they said he was going to go after Vivek, and that never happened. But I'd give Ron DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, a C+. It was a slightly above average showing, but he needed to do a lot more. Maybe it'll give him some framework to build off of going forward, but overall, he needed to do a little bit better job. Then you got Tim Scott, who I would also give a C+. I think him and Ron DeSantis were probably second or third in this debate. Tim Scott kind of didn't really do anything to hurt himself, didn't do anything to help himself. And in that regards, in a debate like this, maybe that's a win, because him just getting exposure on the national stage might be a win for him. He didn't have any answers that were out of left field. He didn't say anything that was alarming, which is good. You don't want to make any unforced errors in your first debate on the presidential stage. And then fourth, you have Christie, Nikki Haley, and Mike Pence. I kind of have them almost all together. I think Mike Pence probably is back in 6th place just because he interrupted so much. I'd give Mike Pence a C-. I'd give Nikki Haley and Christie C's. It's average performances. Christie, I had a little bit higher expectations for him, that he'd show more contrast. There was all this talk of Christie going after former President Donald Trump, and that really wasn't in there too much. There was a question in the debate about, if they'd raise their hand if they would support the eventual nominee, and Christie kind of didn't really answer. He was kind of like, yeah, I was just raising my hand, like he wanted to elaborate. And Asa Hutchinson was, I think, the only candidate said that they wouldn't. But that was kind of a weird moment, because like Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence were looking to their left. So are we all raising our hands? So that's kind of never a good look. But overall, Christie didn't really, he didn't have any moments. He had that Marco Rubio moment back in 2016. He had that Rand Paul moment back in 2016. Didn't have anything. Then you got Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, like I said, she's probably 4th or 5th, along with Christie. Just run-of-the-mill, nothing special. She didn't really have any answers that would blow you away. Kind of some of the answers are what she's been saying along the campaign trail, which might make your eyes roll back, because it's just the typical robotic talking points that she's been doing since she announced. Some identity politics in there. But they didn't really ask her any tough questions either. So just an average performance. And then Mike Pence, like I said, he is just slightly below average. He didn't get, he's actually right behind me up here. He didn't get to say a whole lot during several portions of the early on stages, which I guess that's on the moderators. I thought the moderators did a pretty good job. They had a rowdy crowd at some point. I thought, Mike Pence had this whole moment where they asked this question about him, if he did the right thing in regards to January 6th and the electors, and Mike Pence said, "Oh, do I get a chance to speak after everybody else got to speak?" And he had already actually had like a little bit of chance to go back and forth, and he didn't have really anything to say. And he was like, "Well, do I have a chance to speak? But then I don't have anything prepared or anything of substance." And that was a lot of what was the problem with him. It was a lot of robotic political cliches, and that's unfortunate. And then 7th and 8th, you have Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson, which are just terrible candidates. If you look back to 2016, you have candidates at the end of the stage, such as Rand Paul. I think at some point you had even, Gyllenhaal, you had Mike Huckabee. You had candidates that had real character and that had at least some conservative track record that, the mainstream conservative circles knew about. And I don't think Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson have that at all. I think Asa Hutchinson is only in this because he had a super PAC that had a lot of money that was able to get him on the debate stage, and kind of, he got some mainstream media push, which might have got him to, I think the minimum was 1% in several of the 3 polls. And then Doug Burgum paid people. He said, you needed 40,000 $1 donations, and Doug Burgum paid people $20, I think, if they were to give him $1. So he was essentially buying donors, which, in my opinion, doesn't bode well for a political candidate. I don't know what his real purpose in this race is. I don't know what his angle is, but both Burgum and Hutchinson, like I said, they ruin the flow of the debate. And as they go into the next debate at the Reagan Library, I believe it's at, I would hope that, maybe like a candidate like Elder, if he's still in the race, is in place of either of those two, or they just narrow the stage early on. Maybe Trump will be a part of it. Doesn't sound like he's going to participate in any, so it'll be interesting. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate you giving me the time. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate you giving this video your time, and I would love your feedback. If you can comment it in the comment section below. If you can share this video, like and subscribe. Gonna start putting these out a little bit more. I don't have my voice today because I'm just getting over COVID, so I'm gonna try to post a little bit more consistently. Gonna be traveling, gonna be out in New York City, gonna do some traveling over in the World Trade Center and the Brooklyn Bridge, and go out to Daytona for the NASCAR race. So I'll be all around for the next 2 weeks, and I'll try to do my best though to post some videos here and there. Thank you.